Hello to the pointers, thank you for joining me again and welcome to any new viewers. My name's Ben, this is To The Point English, and today I'm going to teach you all to be diplomats. As you probably all know, English is a very diplomatic language. We try not to be too direct because we don't like to offend, especially British English speakers. So you need to know the tricks on how not to be too direct, how to be a little bit diplomatic, because you could risk offending people who may not understand that, because you're not a native English speaker, you don't really understand these nuances. So in this video, I'm going to teach you a very simple trick on how to sound more diplomatic when you're speaking in English, which will be very useful for your English in general, but also particularly for those Cambridge English exam students. For the speaking paper, for example, in the B2 first and the C1 advanced, part 3, where you have the diagram that you need to collaborate with your colleague to come to some kind of negotiated decision. You need to sometimes maybe disagree or have a different opinion to your partner, and you need to do it in a polite and diplomatic way. And also for the C2 Proficiency, part 2, of the speaking, where you have the pictures that you need to discuss with your partner. Again, you may disagree and you may have a difference of opinion, which is good, there's no problem with that, but you must do it in an appropriate way, not being too direct or offensive. Because this is a very common way of speaking in English, in colloquial English. All native English speakers use this structure, which I'm going to explain in a moment, on a daily basis. It's just part of the way we speak, and it's very simple, as I said. And it actually has an extra benefit, which I'll explain at the end of the video. Now, of course, there are many structures we can use to sound more polite in English, which you are probably already familiar with. For example, we can say, I would like instead of I want. So I would like a drink instead of I want a drink. I want a drink sounds too direct in English. Also, we would say, could you tell me the time instead of just tell me the time? And then a very typical, very elaborate expression we use when we're being extra polite is, I was wondering if it would be possible if you could help me, for example. So I was wondering if it would be possible. But the trick I'm going to tell you today, it's very simple and it's very common. It's not really a trick for native English speakers, but it may help you express yourself in a more diplomatic way, as I said. And it's simply this. We use not very with the opposite adjective to what we want to say. Okay, again, probably the best way to understand this is with some examples. So let's imagine that you want to take a friend or a family member, or maybe your favorite English teacher, to dinner. And you're walking down the street looking for a nice restaurant. And maybe the person you're with says, how about this one? It looks nice. And you look at the menu and you see the prices and you say, it's not very cheap, is it? So it's not very cheap. So really what you're saying there is it's too expensive or it's very expensive. But by saying it's not very cheap, you're just being more diplomatic, less direct. And it's a much more common way to speak in English, in particular British English. Another example is that maybe, let's say you're looking on a dating application, a dating website, and you're scrolling through the options and you're with your friend and your friend says, he looks nice, doesn't he? Or she looks nice. And you say, yeah, he seems nice, but he's not very handsome. So he's not very handsome. That basically means he's ugly. But again, it's a little bit impolite and direct to say he's ugly. So you say he's not very handsome. Another example, imagine your mum asks you, how was your class today? Maybe you had a new class with a new teacher. You say, well, it was okay. It wasn't very interesting. So again, what you're saying there, it was boring, but it's a bit too direct. So it's very, very common in English to say it wasn't very interesting. Another example, maybe with the restaurants again, you've finished your meal and your friend says, how was your meal? And you say, well, it was okay. The dessert wasn't very tasty. The dessert wasn't very tasty, so the dessert was bland, basically. Bland means lacking taste. So again, it wasn't very tasty. Maybe if your friend is paying for the meal, you don't want to offend them by saying it was disgusting or bland or horrible. So you say it wasn't very tasty, it's much safer. As I said, in the Cambridge English exams, when you're discussing the diagram, the spider diagram with the different prompts, and your partner gives their opinion, or maybe you're trying to choose one particular prompt to finish the discussion in the last question in part 2, and you don't particularly like your partner's suggestion, you could say, well, it's not very interesting, is it? Or it's not very difficult, is it? Or it's not very easy. Depending on the question, you adapt the adjective. So what was that extra benefit that I was talking about earlier? Well, what I notice a lot in the exams, in exam practice that we do, or that I do with my students, is that the student often can't remember a word. And often that word is an adjective. It may be a complicated adjective. And they may be sitting there for a few seconds trying to remember the word, and now they're getting a bit anxious because the examiner is waiting, everybody's waiting for them, the seconds are ticking away. So they can't find that word, and they really want to find that adjective. But at some point they're going to have to say, well, I can't remember the adjective I wanted to remember, so I have to use an alternative. And you can use the opposite alternative. So imagine the adjective that they're trying to remember is dull. It's an adjective I taught in a previous video, which means boring. Dull means boring, but they can't remember it. So they can just say it's not very interesting. That gets you out of this situation where you just can't remember the adjective you want to remember. Again, for exams, it's very useful, but for your life in general, it happens to me all the time in Spanish. I just can't remember that word that I really want to use. You can't just be in silence for 2 minutes trying to remember the word. You have to use an alternative way of finishing what you're saying. So the opposite adjective with not very is a good option. Okay guys, I hope you found that useful. Let me know in the comments if you did, or if you have any other examples of your own. And I look forward to seeing you for another video.